Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. Are you a collector? I am. Part of being a collector, as I understand it, is collecting things. These tend to be things with some sort of physicality to them, a certain solidity. You can't really collect an idea, for example, but you can collect, like, a postage stamp, or a rock, or video games. And as with any collecting medium, sometimes the prices can get out of control. A while back, I presented 7 games that are super expensive, but still worth it for all you JRPG collectors out there. And even though I made sure to mention that, of course, emulation is an option if you just want to play these games, I naturally heard in the comments all about emulation, as if it were a completely novel concept heretofore unexplored by humankind. In honor of that, I want to state unequivocally here, in the introduction to this video, that emulation doesn't exist and you have to buy these games physically if you want to play them. Let's see what that gets me. Anyway, I've got 7 more JRPGs for you that will break the bank, but that you'll be happy to add to your collection anyway. Let's get into it. But first, if you like this video, would you hit the like button? And if you enjoy JRPGs as much as I do, would you consider subscribing? Thanks so much. Anyway, yes, expensive games. Let's go. Shadow Hearts looks like it might be setting itself up to be edgelord the game, with its brooding protagonist and demonic-y flying fortress thing in the background. I mean, at least until you look a bit closer and see the faded image of a foppish old man in a top hat. Any game pulling off that level of 90s cheese can't be too dark and brooding, right? Yeah, this game is dark, but it's also weird. Shadow Hearts was a pretty revelatory experience, proving once and for all that compelling JRPGs don't need to be set in some medieval kingdom or in some far-flung future. It takes place in 1913 in our world, or I guess in an alternate reality version of our world. But you'll still find a lot of familiar sights and cities. The gimmick that makes the battle system stand out is the Judgment Ring. This will show up every time you attack, at which point an arrow will begin traveling around it, passing over certain hot spots. Pressing the attack button at those precise moments will increase the efficiency of your attack, which makes the turn-based combat so much more engaging than most of its contemporaries. Graphically, it's definitely not the prettiest game on the PlayStation 2, though it is definitely appropriately gothic. And its use of pre-rendered backdrops with polygonal characters is certainly cleaner than the previous generation of games. Musically though, Shadow Hearts is blessed with a fantastic score, with some tracks even composed by Yasunori Mitsuda, which frequent visitors to this channel will know instantly increases a game's perceived value in my eyes. Speaking of value, this one goes for around $115 these days, complete in box, and it's so worth it in my mind. It's a great game on its own, and honestly, its sequel, Shadow Hearts Covenant, is even better. And it ties in directly with this game, even sharing a protagonist. Shadow Hearts is a must-have. Xenogears is my second favorite game of all time, so you can bet your butt it's going to be on this list. This is the game that started it all as far as the Xenoverse is concerned. Every moment of melodrama in Xenosaga and every epic battle in Xenoblade owes its existence to this masterpiece. It's dark, it's heavy, its text scrolls so slowly, but it's just incredible. This is a game that explores themes that were so controversial it almost didn't make it out in the West. The industry was pretty used to Nintendo and their strict policy restricting anything relating to religion, so I can understand why Square was nervous to let us sensitive Western Hemisphere folks get our hands on it. After all, we're well known for being so needy for things to get upset about that we regularly concoct ridiculous controversies and scares based on nonsense. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. What is both here and there is Xenogears, a game about an amnesiac martial artist using giant robots to kill God. Sort of. It's complicated. Honestly, the tagline for this game could have been, "It's complicated," because the story goes to some crazy places. It's full of interesting characters that you'll come to love, and subject matter guaranteed to make the cover of Trigger Warning magazine. The battles are random, but the combat system is pretty unique. Each character can perform light, medium, and heavy attacks, and based on how many points each character has, you can string them together into beautifully animated combos. And besides that, there's a whole separate combat system for fighting in your giant mechs called Gears. It's a wild ride and a lengthy game, and the second disc is famously rushed, but I love this thing so darn much. And it can be yours for the low, low price of $128 complete in box. Yeah, that's like 2 new games today, but in my mind, it's worth many times more than that. Sega never caught up to Nintendo's JRPG clout, at least not in North America. In Japan, there were storied JRPG series on Sega platforms that the powers that be decided we were too dumb to handle. Or maybe nobody wanted to translate all the words in those text-heavy games. I can see it being either or. or both. But regardless, despite the slim pickings for JRPG fans that were Sega only, there were still some standouts. I mentioned the Shining Force games last time, and I still highly recommend those, but if you want something a little more traditional and a little less strategic, you have to check out Phantasy Star IV. This is the epic conclusion to the story that started way back on the Sega Master System with the original Phantasy Star, and the way its story is told is so unique in the realm of 16-bit JRPGs. Cutscenes play out in the style of manga, only in full color, allowing for dramatic close-ups and more variety in general than other games' use of simple sprites and animations. Part 4 also brings together the best parts of the series' battle systems, particularly in the presentation. The series as a whole was weirdly inconsistent. In Part 1, you never saw your characters in battle, but the enemy animations were quite good, and the backgrounds were colorful and interesting. In Part 2, you saw your party members, and enemies are still animated, but the backgrounds were replaced with a boring grid. In Part 3, the backgrounds were back, but your characters were gone. Part 4 brought it all together. Animated enemies, colorful backgrounds, physically present characters. I mean, okay, it's not that important. It's just something I found weird and I wanted a place to talk about it. Regardless of whether you've played any other game in the series, most veterans of JRPGs will agree that Phantasy Star IV is the cream of the crop on the Sega Genesis. At $166, it had better be good, right? Well look, I'll let you off the hook here. Since this is one of those cardboard box Genesis games, you can grab it card only for around $65. I won't tell anyone. It feels strange to stick Chrono Trigger in the middle of part 2 of a list of expensive JRPGs. That's because it's my all-time favorite game, and putting it anywhere but in the final slot as a sort of place of honor just comes across as sort of sacrilegious to me. But I'm trying to generally list these in ascending order of priciness, and a card-only version of Chrono Trigger falls right about here, so here it is. Chrono Trigger is the GOAT. It was made by a dream team of developers, including big names behind Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, with characters designed by Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball fame. It had one of the most incredible soundtracks of the 16-bit or any era, composed by Yasunori Mitsuda, with some help from Mr. Final Fantasy himself, Nobuo Uematsu. It was the height of 16-bit JRPG storytelling and gameplay mechanics. And beyond just being an exceptional game on its own merits, it broke new ground for the entire industry, introducing the concept of New Game Plus that finds its way into almost every JRPG these days, as well as proving the feasibility of 3-character battle parties in modern role-playing games. To paraphrase the Great Seal, if you don't know Chrono Trigger by now, well, I just don't know what to tell you. It's beloved for a reason. If you're new to JRPGs, or you're a seasoned veteran that somehow missed it, you need to pick it up. The $200 the cart by itself goes for is chump change compared to the value you're getting out of this game. Seriously. Are you ready for some creepy weirdness? Because I want to introduce you to my friend Koudelka. Just kidding, Koudelka isn't my friend. It's a Japanese role-playing game on the Sony PlayStation. And it's wild. This game came about from a group of delirious developers hopped up on whatever mind-altering substances they use in Japan, where one of them said, what if Resident Evil but RPG? And the rest is history. Okay, Resident Evil but RPG is a bit simplistic. Koudelka uses some of the trappings of classic survival horror, like static pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles and creepy environments, to create a similar sense of dread. But the gameplay is about as different as it gets. Despite looking for all the world like Alone in the Dark or Resident Evil, Koudelka is a turn-based JRPG with weapons, magic, the works. Battles take place in large arenas, and turns play out similarly to a strategy RPG. Each character can move a set number of squares depending on their stats, and positioning yourself to take advantage of each situation is key. Battles are a bit slow, I'll admit, but at the same time, the game doesn't overstay its welcome, so that never bothered me. Plus, Koudelka is the prologue to the Shadow Hearts series, so if you're serious about diving deeper into that dark world, this is a must play. We're scaling the mountain of affordability now, with this one clocking in at $243 complete in box. But it's a blast to play, and it's worthy of a spot in your collection. Okay, this is the part where I start cheating. I said 7 games, but really it's like... well, it's more than that. And that's in part because I'm including all 3 of the Xenosaga games in this entry. If that sounds strange, then let me assure you, it's because these 3 titles are a holy trinity of JRPG gaming that you need to experience in its entirety. As a teenage fan of Xenogears, I was disheartened when I learned many of the key people behind that game had left Square. It made a continuation of that story so much less likely. My disappointment there was equaled only by my excitement when I learned a team, headed up once again by Tetsuya Takahashi, was developing Xenosaga for the PlayStation 2. This was it. This was what Xenogears was always meant to be. Xenogears was supposed to be part 5 of a 6-part story told out of order, and the fact that Xenosaga was subtitled Episode 1 filled my head with all sorts of possibilities. It was originally slated to be that full 6-episode series, which was sadly cut down to 3 because of poor sales. Because of this, the final game does feel a little overstuffed. You can tell they were desperate to get everything in there so the conclusion could make as much sense as possible. Still, this was probably the most ambitious interactive storytelling project of its day, and experiencing them is more important now than ever, particularly since, and spoiler alert for the Xenoblade series, skip ahead like 10 seconds if you don't want to know, particularly since Xenoblade has confirmed that it takes place in the same universe as Xenosaga and suggests deep connections between them. Takahashi is a genius, and you need to play his games. Now the first one is chump change, 25 bucks. You might find that in your couch cushions. Even episode 2 isn't bad at $47. But episode 3 is where you might need to take out a line of credit, $212. That brings the grand total to own this trilogy to $284. That's a lot. And if you're anything like me, you might be holding out hope that Monolith Soft is going to remaster these for the Switch or something. And I hope that happens, but until that day comes, and honestly, even after, these are worth owning for fans of the greater Xeno series. Dragon Quest is a classic series. So much of what we take for granted in JRPGs can trace its roots back to Dragon Quest. It was where I got my start, and it jump-started the entire industry in Japan. These games were so popular that they were blamed for rampant truancy in Japanese schools. Life had to be put on hold so little Hikari and little Hayato could get their DQ fix. We received the first 4 Dragon Quest games on the NES under the name Dragon Warrior. Dragon Quests 5 and 6 never found their way to Western Super Nintendos for reasons that don't entirely make sense to me. I know that Enix was pulling away from the Western market at that time, but it's still sort of surprising that someone like Nintendo themselves didn't step in to make sure we got those games. But they remained elusive. That is, until the Nintendo DS rolled around. After some success in remaking Dragon Quests 1 through 3 for the Game Boy Color, Square Enix decided to upgrade the next 3 games for the new generation of handhelds. Dragon Quest 4, 5, and 6 on the Nintendo DS are the definitive versions of these games. Most notable, of course, is the fully 3D graphics for overworld exploration. But battles still take place in that classic 2D first-person perspective. Okay, yes, I know the battle arenas are technically 3D, but they were going out of their way to simulate the old 2D perspective, so I stand by it. The games utilize the dual screens well, getting your character portraits and stats out of the way of the action and onto their own screen. These are must-haves for JRPG fans, but how much do they cost? Well, I've got some bad news. Dragon Quest IV is the cheapest right now at around $90 complete in box. Dragon Quest V is ridiculous at $170, and Dragon Quest VI has settled back down into the $92 range. This brings the grand total for the Dragon Quest DS trilogy to $352. This is car payment money, or like monthly grocery bill for a family of 4 money. It's a lot, is what I mean. Still, if you can afford it, the Dragon Quest games are classics, and they'll look so good on your shelf. And emulating DS isn't the most fun I've ever had, so I'll vouch for playing them on original hardware as the definitive way to experience them. So that's it. A bunch more games for you to spend your money on. What do you think? Any of these strike you as worth picking up? Any of these you disagree with strongly? Do you think I should just have emulated all these and not have spent any money at all? Let me know down in the comments. Once again, please like the video and consider subscribing. It helps out a ton. Anyway, until next time.